Welcome to my room thing that I got set up over here. Uh, Tonight we're gonna go over a project that took about the last 2 years, I would imagine, if I have it all right. We went around and we it's North Bergen stories, and we went around and we tried to gather as many firsthand accounts of North Bergen and North Bergen isms that we could. So we interviewed a ton of people. We're gonna go through some of the interesting things we went through, and one of my favorite things is, and this was kind of like a pet project of mine, is like my something I really enjoy doing. It started really like with family stories that I always heard growing up. And I grew up on 67th Street and Durham Avenue. And my grandmother always used to tell us that 67th and Smith Avenue, there was a lake there, there was a pond there. And, now being fortunate enough to go and work here as, with the history of the town, I looked it up, and sure enough, she was right. There was a lake there. She always said the houses are crooked because there's a lake there, so, that's something that really stuck with me when I did this project. I wanted to get those type of stories. And I got a chance to meet with a lot of really interesting people. Before, I guess, we'll jump into actual interviews, there was one thing, and if you're from North Bergen, you've passed it a million times. You probably noticed it because there's usually you usually get stuck at the traffic light down there. Uh, right after town hall, right around, I guess that'd be 45th Street, there is the Garden State Crematory. Right, we all know it's that creepy building. It's pushed back all the way off Kennedy Boulevard. But if you haven't noticed it, next time you're down there, take a look at the building, right? And there's this bizarre fountain in front of it. It's a fountain of a dolphin. And I never understood, why is there a fountain of a dolphin in front of a crematory? Was it on sale? What was it? We got to work with them and find out the history of the building. And again, not to spend too much time on the building, but the building was at one point somebody's house, right? It was a castle for a very wealthy landowner. But he has nothing to do with this dolphin fountain, right? So I asked, the owner, I said, why is there a dolphin in front of it? And he said, I have no idea except the story. And I said, well, what's the story? And he said, the story is that there's a gentleman sometime in the 50s who his wife was interned in the mausoleum, and she loved dolphins. And he wanted to give her a gift for her birthday. And he bought this crematory a dolphin fountain. And it's been sitting there ever since the 1950s. And I think that's such an amazing story. It's such a unique piece of history that we pass every day. I saw a couple of names in here, so I know there's people who've passed by it before. People have seen it before. And I think it's something interesting that these little stories are all over the place. Kind of when we talk to people, look, my first idea was to talk to people who have been here forever, right? What are the stories of people who have been here forever? And the easiest way to do that was we looked at the oldest businesses in town. And two of them were nice enough to sit down with me and entertain me. I met with Janelle Colonia, right, of the famous North Bergen Colonia brothers, right, the Italian products, and she was awesome. She's the great granddaughter of Dominic Colonia, the guy who founded the company. And she said when he started the business, it was just a little storefront in Six Corners. It was located where most people remember where Keystone was, bottom of the hill, rock bottom prices, right? And she said by the 50s, again, they grew into something bigger than the small shop that he set up, and they moved up the hill, right? Again, it's another brand. My wife makes fun of me when we go food shopping out. If I see Colonia products, I buy them. She goes, why do you buy them? I go, it's from North Bergen. I buy them. Another great story is I got to meet with Lois Marone, and Lois is the daughter of Andrew Ruther, right? Ruther Material. And, she explained to me, hey, listen, we've been in business since 1925. And, I said, yeah, that's amazing. She goes, but we weren't always here. And I said, what do you mean you weren't always here? She goes, we didn't move here until 1927. The first 2 years that Ruther Brothers existed, they were down on the Hudson River. They said they were on the Hudson River basically because it was easier to get materials. And it wasn't until 1927 when they completed those railway lines. Now we have by the 51st Street Light Rail Station. She said they moved up here because they said the rail gave them better opportunity, a bigger reach. So it's something we've probably all passed by a million times when we're on Tunnel Avenue. You get stuck at that light on 51st Street. You look to your right, Ruther Material is going to be there. And again, another interesting fact, and she wouldn't give me the answer on this. I think she was being polite with me and being nice. But there's a rumor, right, and another story in North Bergen that every house in North Bergen has a piece of material from Ruther Material in it, right? Whether it's originally from Ruther's or a repair done later in history, that's the rumor. I don't know how true it is. I'd like to think that that's 100% true, that we all got a piece of Ruther Material in our properties. We'll shift gears a little bit. I got to meet with this a real character, right? It was a great time. Joe Moncelli, and Joe was, and Joe's 100 years old, right? Not like, oh, that guy's 100 years old. No, Joe's literally 100 years old. And he invited me into his home, and Joe was, he was a character. He's a funny guy. He's got a great sense of humor, and I got to break Joe's chops a little bit. He's not from North Bergen, right? I always hold that against people. He's from Union City, and Joe said, because when I was born, there was no Union City. He said, I was born in West Hoboken. And I said, oh, wow, yeah, I've heard of West Hoboken. He said, and I was born on Patterson Avenue in West Hoboken, which is today 5th Street. And he had all these great stories about growing up in West Hoboken and on 5th Street, and how he said one thing that he thought was really interesting is that the area has never really changed in some sense. He goes, I've been here 100 years. He goes, I've seen it all. But he said you used to walk down the street and you'd hear 4 or 5 different languages being spoken. He said, you still hear that today. He goes, people still hold on to their heritage. He thought that was pretty amazing. But when we talked about North Bergen, he had these 2 great stories. And the first one, he said when he was a kid, it was a game they would play, right? And this, he said they would get on the trolley, right? And again, there used to be trolleys that zigzagged all over, Broadway and Park Avenue, Bergen Line Avenue, that would take you from basically Jersey City all the way up to Cliffside Park. And he said the fun thing we would do is we'd get on the trolley and we'd sit in the back end of the trolley and we'd disconnect it and see how many times we could disconnect the train from the cables until the trolley conductor threw us off, right? And he laughed. I said, that's some form of entertainment. He goes, well, we didn't have phones. We didn't have anything. He goes, that was how you entertained yourself. You bothered the trolley conductors. So I think that's a great piece of history, right? Something today, something we all missed out on, I guess, disconnecting trolley trains. Joe also told me about, he said he had the most romantic moment ever in Hudson County Park. And he said in the history of the park, nobody had a more romantic moment than himself. And I said, you got to tell me. So Joe explained, right, he met his wife, Rita, when they were young kids in grammar school. And he said it was a big deal. They went up to Hudson County Park. That was the big deal, all the way from 5th Street. And he said he asked her to get married in Hudson County Park, right? It's February, we just missed Valentine's Day. It's a nice romantic story, right? I wonder how many of stories there are like that in the park, right? People who pop the question, so to say. Now, it was one day, we met with a bunch of people too, and it was a lot of fun. We had, for me, these are guys that I've heard of my entire life in North Bergen, and having them all in the room at one time was pretty fun. We have an audio recording, and we'll make it available. But if you listen to it, you could just tell everybody in the room is from North Bergen. Like that's there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Everybody's from North Bergen. But we had former Police Chief Galvin. He was in the room. Johnny Shaw was in the room. Commissioner Frank Gargiulo was in the room, who I called him Frank, and, like by accident, and he gave me a look, like, and I was like, oh, I better not call him Frank ever again. Charlie Carrera, right, was in the room. Jerry Sanzari, and then we had a couple of people come in as well and give us these stories about North Bergen. And what was really amazing for me was that there were some students of mine who came along to hear, right? I didn't have to bribe them. I didn't have to force them. They came when I told them what I was doing. They said, I want to hear what this town was like. And I think that was really interesting. So these stories are kind of all over the place, and a lot of them repeat, but they all intersect at a lot of places. For example, former Chief Galvin, he said, listen, I grew up in North Bergen. He told us where, grew up in the 70s, the 70s meaning the streets, and I went to North Bergen, Robert Fulton, and went to, North Bergen High School and so on. And it was interesting that everybody in the room still remembered, not in a way that they're that old, but they still all had these stories about teachers and going to what grammar school they went to, and remember the so-and-so from here, remember so-and-so from there. And they traded all these stories back and forth. And it was amazing, right? Because, I teach in the high school, and the kids in the schools today, they still hold on to what grammar school they went to. And I think that's something unique to the town, because we have so many schools. But again, Chief Galvin went on and said, when he was growing up, it was almost like everybody you knew was family. He said you had a mother in every house on the street, and that you'd be outside in the summertime, play ball in the street from 8 a.m. You go home for dinner, and then you go back out again. And then, something that got a laugh out of the kids that were there. He said, and if you did a bad thing on one end of the street, you got a kick in the butt, and or you got whacked by somebody that told to go home to your mother, and you had to tell them, because if you didn't tell them, and they found out, your parents would give you the business, so to say. And he said, something amazing was that the storekeepers knew you, and that they trusted you, that you could go into the stores, and if you didn't have money for something, the shopkeepers would let you have it, candy bar or drink or whatever it was. And he said the shopkeepers knew your parents. They knew your parents were good for the money. They'd pay you later tomorrow. And he said it was, that's something he remembers really in detail about growing up. And the next thing he said was the snowstorms. He said the snowstorms were big. And again, I know we got a couple of inches coming tomorrow, but he said he remembers growing up, and the snow was there for like 3 or 4 days. They didn't plow the streets like they do today. But, you'd go sledding and jumping all over the place. And he remembers people having snowmobiles driving around the 70s. And that's something for me. I don't know. I couldn't imagine that today. People driving snowmobiles around, but it's good to see people going out and sledding. Hopefully during all this craziness, we still go out. When we talked with Johnny Shaw, he said the same thing, very similar to Chief Galvin. I went to Lincoln School, and, and then we had an argument about Lincoln School and Robert Fulton School, which school was better. And he gave us all these stories about growing up in town, and one that, still, I can't picture it today. Can't picture it as much as I want to try. He told us how he grew up on Columbia Avenue, near 67th Street. Near today, that would be by the senior citizen buildings that are down there. And he said there was nothing behind his house. That you just would walk out your back door and you'd be in the swamps, right? You cross Tunnel Avenue, you'd be in the swamps. There was no West Side Avenue, no nothing, no factories, no nothing back there. And then he told me this story that he would go hunting out in the swamps by West Side Avenue. He said he would throw a rifle over his shoulder as a young kid and go hunt rabbit and pheasant, and muskrats, right? And I looked over at these young students that were in the room, and they couldn't believe, the imagery of a person walking down 67th Street to go hunting. And he said, Johnny Shaw said, nobody said anything. They made fun of you. He said, if you came back with nothing, they would make fun of you. Again, different world, right? He doubled, like Chief Galvin said, everybody knew everybody. He said it didn't matter if you lived on 5th Street, knew who you were. If you lived on 91st Street, we knew who you were. And something that came up, as we were having these conversations, is that no matter where you go, somebody recognizes you from North Bergen, that North Bergen is unescapable in some sense. And I think that's an interesting story that we have. He also went in saying that doors were always open, and you would eat dinner at other people's houses, maybe 2 times a week sometimes, if and then you'd go home and eat dinner at your own house, trade dinners with people. He talked about being a teenager and driving muscle cars, those great cars from the 60s and 70s up and down Bergen Line Avenue, and hanging out by Hudson County Park, and You know, he said, nobody bothered you. He goes, unless you were a knucklehead, that's the only time anybody bothered you. He said, but you could hang out all hours of the night. He also mentioned sleigh riding as well. He said that was the biggest thing, right? He said he was able at one point, he goes, he could recall going from the top of 67th Street near Kennedy Boulevard. He said, you could sleigh ride all the way down to Tunnelly Avenue. And the only thing to stop you flying into Tunnelly Avenue was a concrete wall. If you missed the wall, you went right into Tunnelly Avenue. He actually said that was his best childhood memory, is sledding down 67th Street. And he said he remembered also that something that's unimaginable again today. People would park on Tunnelly Avenue. He said there was no traffic, no cars, there was nothing there. People would park down there. He also recalled protesting in high school. And this is something, you know, the high school kids today break their chops all the time because they have to wear uniforms, a polo shirt, and you know, a little bit khaki pants or whatever it is. And he said, I remember protesting on an island in front of North Bergen High School because we didn't want to wear ties anymore. We didn't want to wear a tie to school, and they had a protest. So, you know, I thought that was interesting. He also brought up River Road, right? And he said he remembers when River Road was a two-way street, not the overdeveloped area that it is today. He said he remembers that the water would be right up against, you know, when you're heading northbound on River Road, the water was right up against the road, and, you know, passing the Ford factory where the movie theater was. Now he's probably developed now, but, and, you know, he had memories of driving on River Road. He also said, again, this is something weird. I couldn't imagine. He says he remembers that Bergen Avenue got kind of vacated during the 50s and 60s, and how, you know, during the 60s when the Cubans started coming up, that they really breathed new life into Bergen Avenue, kind of saved the street and extended its life a little more, which was really interesting to hear. We interviewed, again, Charlie Carrera, who he told us we moved from Hoboken. And the reason they moved from Hoboken when he was a kid, he said, everybody said, you know, it's nicer in North Bergen. You know, the grass is greener. That was the saying people in Hoboken had about North Bergen. And he even remembered, he said, I remember my realtor. He goes, Louis Delator. And he said, I remember his office on Kennedy Boulevard. And, you know, to no surprise, he said, you know, it's kind of synonymous with North Bergen. He goes, there was an election going on, and the realtor was trying to sell his parents on who to vote for. You know, that's everybody's got a North Bergen story like that. But his family settled in. They saw it was a family kind of oriented town. He said, you know, when we moved in Hoboken, you knew who lived upstairs, downstairs, to the left, and to the right. And now all of a sudden I knew people all over town, you know. So he said that's a great story about the town. You had friends, and then he said something, such a unique North Bergen saying. He goes, I had friends up the hill, I had friends down the hill. You know, you don't get that anywhere else, the up the hill, down the hill idea. So he even said, you know, he went on, he said, you had friends, you knew good people all over town. He said, it's the most wonderful thing I ever received in life, he said, is having to got to meet that many people. And he said something to the kids before he left. He said, listen, North Bergen, it's a great example of how this is the land of opportunity. You know, he pointed out to the people that were there. And he said, you know, you really could do anything. And you know, you got a great chance of getting ahead being from this area. And I think that was great that he reached out to the kids. My next interview after that was with Commissioner Gargiulo, right? And he had some unbelievable stories. He told us how he moved into North Bergen from West New York in 1946. And he said, I moved into 1946. He said, I moved in to 1901 73rd Street. He goes, I now have lived at 1907 73rd Street. He literally bought a house 2 doors down. He's never left, he said. He said, when my parents moved, he goes, I remember them saying this. He goes, that we're moving to the country. And he goes, that we moved across Kennedy Boulevard. Like, that's where we moved, across Kennedy Boulevard, and we were in the country. And he said it was a big deal. You know, it's a big step for a family, you know, to buy their first home. And he's right. He kind of was, Mr. Gargiulo was great. He was all over the place. He was saying, you know, he remembers, you didn't have a high school. He goes, North Bergen kids left. He goes, everybody went all over the place. If you lived uptown, you know, you went to Cliffside High School. If you lived, you know, midtownish, you went to either Weehawken or Memorial. If you lived downtown, you went to Union Hill or you went to Emerson. And he said, if you were a really good athlete, you could have went anywhere you wanted. He said, he goes, a lot of times it would go down to Dickinson and, the Jersey City schools. He said the town was always friendly. That's the one he said, it's always friendly, the town. He said, when I was little, half the families in town didn't have a car, right? He said phones, if you had a phone in your house, it was called a party line. He goes, and I remember picking up the phone and have a bunch of people like yelling at me to get off the phone. He went on and talked about Hudson County Park in the wintertime and how he used to be able to rent ice skates and go on the lake. And he even told the kids that were there, he said, listen, you guys are missing a great time. He goes, you missed out, and again, it'd be amazing to go ice skating, right? We can only get a little colder. And he again went on and he explained how, behind his house, he had a pond on 74th Street. There was a pond back there. And the big deal was to get pallets from the embroidery factories and make boats out of them and try to sail across these like ponds. He said that was like a big deal. Maybe recalled being a young kid and having Honeker's Dairy around the corner from him, which would have been on about 75th Street, I believe. If I might be on my 75th or 72nd, I was getting confused. But he remembers, he said, you'd get milk, cream, butter, eggs, you'd walk right over. He goes, or they deliver it right to your front door. And then he said, I remember Dugan's. He goes, Dugan's would deliver bread and milk to the house. He described these powdered donuts, and here's they bring them right to your house. He brought up doctor visits. He brought up his childhood doctor, Dr. Miller. And he said Dr. Miller would make house calls. $5. He'd come check out every kid in the family for $5. And, he laughed. He chuckled. He said, he goes, nobody had insurance back then. You paid the doctor $5. He came hung out in your house. He also went on and explained, there was nothing for kids today, nothing like the kids have today. You had to make your own entertainment, right? He said you went out in the morning, you got home before it was dark. And, when you were older, I think this was really great. He goes, you hung out in ice cream parlors, and he named 3 of them, right? He still remembered. He goes, there was Jerry's, which turned into Huey's in North Bergen. He told us, he said that was a big hangout for North Bergen kids. And he said there was Harry's in Guttenberg and Freddy's in West New York. And he said, that's where you spent your time. He goes, you went, you hung out there and you met people. Then I asked him, I said, Mr. Gargiulo, what do you think's a major icon in town? He goes, White Castles, right? He said, White Castles, the first thing he said, which again, I also think it's very unique, North Bergen. When you talk to people from North Bergen, they add an S onto White Castles for some reason. I'm doing it on purpose now, but listen to it. People will say White Castles. He told us it was another hangout. He said they would have young ladies come out, high school kids, on roller skates, take your order. He goes, I remember a hamburger being 12 cents. He goes, you had a couple of bucks, you went up and you got about a dozen hamburgers. He goes, that was a big deal. That was a big time. Go to White Castle, get some food. Something he said also that was very funny. Stories, I'm pretty sure if you're a lifelong resident, you've heard it. He goes, when I was growing up, he said North Bergen had a lot of bars and a lot of bookies, and the kids all laughed, and then we had to make sure they knew what a bookie was. And, to some of our surprises, they knew what a bookie was, which was a little weird, but, see him in class the next day, but it's all right. He said it was fun living here. He said playing in the streets was normal, right? He said there barely were any playgrounds. He said, yeah, you played whatever you wanted in the street, baseball, stickball, whatever it was. He goes, you did it, right? He goes, there were no cars on the street. Nobody had cars. You had all this room. He brought up summertime. He goes, the one thing he remembers about summertime is that there was no air conditioning. He said, my father used to tell us we have cross ventilation. And then he says to the kids, do you know what cross ventilation is? And they don't know what it is. He goes, you open your doors and your windows and you let the breeze cool your house down. He said whole different world than today. He goes, today you don't have air conditioning. There's an emergency in the house. He goes, we didn't have it. He recalled getting his first TV, right? He goes, I remember getting the first TV. He goes, my family got a TV in 1950. He goes, and we watched a boxing match. He goes, there's the 2-3 channels. He goes, and I was the remote. He goes, I got up, I had to change the channel every time my dad wanted to see something. He went on, he remembered bus lines on Kennedy Boulevard, which today we don't really see too much anymore. Everybody takes the Bergen line or Boulevard East to get in and out of the city a little faster. But he recalled the orange and black buses that would take you down to Journal Square. But but he said you didn't really take them. You know, you lived within a 2 to 3 block radius of your house. He said going to downtown North Bergen was like going to another country when he was a young kid. You know, he just said it's an interesting. He said he kept repeating it over and over. It's an interesting community because it was a great place to grow up, and that's kind of the vibe we got from everybody. This is a great place to grow up. It's something unique about growing up in North Bergen. And again, right, you know, these interviews took place over a whole bunch of time. It wasn't even the winter time, but even Mr. Gargiulo brought up sleigh riding, you know, and he said it was the best. He goes, you could do whatever you want. He goes, we used to sleigh ride down 73rd Street, down Kennedy Boulevard, all the way down. He goes, you'd get Tunnelly Avenue, and he goes, you'd have to walk back up. He said that was the worst part. He goes, and you didn't have to worry about anything. He goes, no cars, nobody was driving. He goes, the worst part was, he goes, you had to worry about for trees. That was your biggest concern. He said in the summertime, the dead end street off 73rd Street back there, he said there was a couple of trees back there. He goes, we had rope swings, and you know, all you did was climb a tree and hang out back there. That's all you did. He brought up going swimming in the quarry where Burlington Coat Factory is. You know, he said that was a big deal. He goes, nobody had swimming pools, and he goes, when it got too hot, what were you gonna do? He goes, because you couldn't just sit there. He goes, you went swimming. Brought up movie theaters that he used to go to. The Alvin movie theater he was very fond of. He said it was where Pinnacle Supermarket was, the Met over on Bergen Avenue in Gunberg. He said you got to watch 3 movies. And then there was a movie they would play at the end, or a film of men racing, like runners. And he said you got a raffle ticket, and if you won, if your guy won on the race, you'd win a board game. He goes, you'd win like a Monopoly, you know, board game. He goes, I remember it cost 20 cents to go see 3 movies, and you had a chance of walking out with a board game. You know, he talked about going to the Astor Theater, which is now Immaculate Heart Chapel, and the Embassy, which is was over on 73rd and Bergen Avenue. He then brought up also the WOR Tower, which was a huge radio and TV tower that was built over in the Woodcliff neighborhood. And he goes, I remember, you know, in the 50s when, he goes, I was in high school and an airplane hit it. You know, he goes, I remember it broke the tower in half, and you know, he said everybody went up to go look at it, and you know, police chased everybody out, and you know, he remembers people having to be evacuated from the area because they didn't know if the tower was going to fall or you know where it was going to go. And he goes, that was a scary time. He goes, but you know, it's funny. He goes, who thought putting a giant tower in the middle of a residential area was a good idea? You know, he laughed at that. You got a good reflection on that. He brought up Schutzen Park. He said something pretty interesting. He goes, you know, Schutzen Park, he goes, the Germans set that up. He goes, but they had to let us in, you know, in that great Mr. Gargiulo kind of way he could say things. He said they had clubs and dances down there. He said he remembers, he goes, I went to Columbia Park, which was right next door, another social area. He goes, I had my first date. He goes, first date I ever had was in the roller rink in Columbia Park. He goes, I couldn't roller skate. He goes, I almost fell and broke my ankle. But he recalled, you know, I remember the amusement park that was there. He goes, the roller skating was there once a week. And he said wrestling. There was live wrestling, like WWF or WWE wrestling. He goes, everybody would go down there. That was a big draw. You could bowling and a pool and a cabana, right? It was everything. He goes, it was ours. He said, he goes, we would go there, and he goes, you had the alternative to go to Palisades amusement park. He goes, but this was ours. He goes, this was for Hudson County folks. He also said it was interesting, you know, that the neighborhoods in North Bergen, there's a lot of neighborhoods in North Bergen, you know, but he said everything was built around an industry. He goes, if you grew up back then, he goes, you knew factories where they were, and that's where people worked. They lived close to work. He said on 73rd and Adams, right by his house, there was at least 3 factories. He goes, he remembered the scissor factory that used to be over there. And he said, it's where your mom worked, where your dad worked. He goes, your aunts, your uncles all worked there. He said every neighborhood was a old school blue collar kind of neighborhood. He goes, the kids were blue collar. You know, he said that's kind of, he thinks that's a legacy that North Bergen has, is that the kids are tough in North Bergen because of that blue collar legacy. He said he remembers Bergen Avenue was the mall. He goes, there's no malls. You went to Bergen Avenue and shopped. And he also made a point to stick it to Memorial High School a little bit. And I like that. I went to St. Joe's High School before it closed. And he said Memorial High School was a football powerhouse when he was growing up in the 60s. And he said, he goes, they owe it all to Coach Coviello, right? Because he was smart and he recruited nothing but North Bergen kids. He goes, that's where there was a ton of great athletes in North Bergen. And he said North Bergen never got credit for a lot of the athletes that, they got poached because we had no high school. When we talked to Jerry Sanzari, Jerry doubled down on a lot of all this stuff. He said one of his memories was that he remembers his grandfather, right, in his older age, he would make paint. He would make his own paint. And he told us how he made it. He made it milk-based paint. He said it was a cheaper paint and he would sell it to people in the neighborhood. So I thought that was pretty amazing, right? That he had that. And he said, I remember growing up and there was a pizza war in town, that there were two pizzerias on Broadway. There was Broadway Pizza and Vinny's Pizza. And each one of them kept trying to get the prices lower to win the kids over from Robert Fulton School. And he said, he goes, I remember pizza, like get a slice and a drink down to a quarter at one point. He goes, they ran each other out of business. And I think that's an interesting thing. Then we got to meet Ruth and Mario Mazzarato. And they were great. Mario, what a funny guy. He said, one of the first things he ever said was, he goes, there was an army camp when he was growing up in Hudson County Park. And he was saying during World War II, there was anti-aircraft guns and spotlights in the park, and you weren't allowed in. And that the trucks, the GIs, right, would drive the trucks up and down Kennedy Boulevard, and they would stop at the red lights. And he goes, all the kids would run out, and the GIs would throw, supplies at them, rations and whatnot. And he said, he goes, I remember going through air raid drills and all these different things, and people looking around for spies, and he gave us this really interesting outlook on what it was like in this area during the war. He also said they would walk past the old embroidery factories and they would discard all the patches for the troops that, the Big Red One or whatever, Easy Company, whatever it might have been, that had errors. And he goes, we would take them out of the garbage. They were like baseball cards. We tried to collect all of them, whoever could get the most, would win. He goes, I don't know what you'd win. He goes, but you'd win something. He also told the story about how everybody made wine. Everybody in their house made wine. And he remembered going down to Hoboken with his father to pick out the grapes. He was like, we would grind them every Saturday, barrel it, make about 6 barrels, and then move them into wine cellars. And he goes, I remember also building wine cellars with people, or his dad building wine cellars. And then he said, I remember, one time a cat got into a wine cellar. He goes, and nobody saw it. And then we opened it up next Saturday. He goes, and the cat couldn't walk straight. Mario, he laughed at that. He got a good chuckle out of that one. He also said, he brought up racing pigeons. He said, everybody raced pigeons. And there were pigeon coops everywhere. He said, I had the time to race, right? He had the time to race, excuse me. And he goes, there was this clock and you'd stick the timer little badge in, and that's how you figured out how fast the bird went wherever it had to go. He said you could buy a racing pigeon on Bergen Avenue for 50 cents and then, train it and do whatever it is you need to do. He goes, I won a race when I was young in 1939. He goes, I won one. He goes, it was a race from Washington, D.C. to New York. He goes, I remember winning that. And his wife goes, we have the trophy at home. So, it was a big deal. He also remembered and brought up that, when you grew up in North Bergen, you didn't really leave much. He goes, and I remember he grew up on 91st Street. He said, he goes, I remember looking out, west over the Hackensack River and always asking, what's out there? He goes, you just didn't leave. You didn't have to leave. You had everything right here. He also had these great stories about, he goes, I remember, I was about 15 years old, and he goes, there was a lot of dance halls, along Bergen Avenue and Broadway, especially in West New York and Union City. He said we'd get all dressed up, and try to sneak into the wedding receptions. He goes, and, we try to get something to eat and, try to sneak beers out. He goes, I remember one time I ordered a rum and Coke, and the bartender chased him out. He's like, chased him out of the venue. And, Yeah, I think it's stories like that, right? That people that they cherish forever. Marriott was a much older guy, and here he is still telling the story to me and a group of high school kids. I thought it was interesting. He also went on to mention you always went to dances where athletes were, and he brought up some great players, historical players. Tommy Hinson played down in St. Michael's. He wound up playing professional ball with the Boston Celtics. Another guy, Harry Brooks at Union Hill. He said, you always went to the dances where they were, because he said that's where all the girls were. He goes, and I got to give him credit. He said it in front of his wife, which is impressive. But, these are things that he held on to. And he said people lived, here for jobs. He goes, this was the place to go. He said, I got a job in Unilever when I was 18 years old. He goes, I had friends that worked in Alcoa, Jack Frost Sugar, the coffee company, Hills Brothers, Thomas Henry Trucking, all these businesses that used to be down on River Road. He had all these great memories and these great stories of just this time that's, it's gone, we may never see it again. But these are the stories that we collected. Like I said, we have the audio recording. We will be putting those up on our website soon. Hopefully, I have some tech issues with those, but we'll have those up. But again, I encourage all of you that are here, send us your stories. We still want them. We want to gather as much information about town as possible. It doesn't matter how long you've been in town, or you could be here 15 minutes. We want to know what you think. All right, we want to hear the stories. This way we could preserve them for the next generation of North Bergeners to come. That is all I have for you guys. I'll open it up to any questions about anything, these stories, or any general other things. You can throw them in the chat. It's up to you. No, I did not speak to John Brennan. I wish I could have. I would have wanted to hear some FBI secrets, but no, we could not get a hold of John Brennan. All right. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right. Well, just to let you guys know what's going on with us at the Historical Society, we have a couple of big projects underway here. We're partnering with some local artists to recreate a lot of our postcard collections that we have. Sorry, let me get into this. There are famous people from here. I mean, listen, there's definitely a ton of famous people from here.
Yeah, children.
I think it depends on what we would consider famous still at this point. I think there's people are famous within their own times. For example, we had a very famous Olympian from North Bergen, a guy by the name of Jesse Pike. He competed in the 1912 Olympics as a cyclist. So, you have Jesse Pike, you have so many athletes that came through. Al Blozis was here. Big star athlete, was killed during World War II, on a reconnaissance mission. Jimmy Braddock, he spent some of his life here. Originally from New York, from West New York, didn't move to North Bergen until he wins the title, but he's the champ when he lives in North Bergen. That's the way I like to tell that one. But there's so many people that lived in this town, and there's people famous for so many different reasons. Which is why we're here, right? Why we're here to collect all these stories. Are there any short stories of downtown? Downtown North Bergen, I always get a lot of stuff because people say I always leave downtown North Bergen out. But downtown North Bergen has a lot of history. It originally was known as Tyler Park. It was named after the designer of the neighborhood. Downtown, the streets haven't changed in 180 years. The names have, but not the layout. It was designed by Phineas Tyler and Charles Gobish, two big land developers, and they laid out the streets and set everything up. And Tyler Park's kind of a forgotten neighborhood. We've lost that name. I say it a lot. I hope it makes a comeback. I like it. But we're actually going to talk a little more about downtown in our next presentation. We're going to be doing, we actually looked up all the names of the streets in North Bergen. We figured out where they came from. Not the numbers, obviously, we're not going to do that, but like all the different names, streets, Durham Avenue, Smith Avenue, Bove Terrace, downtown, Columbia Ave, Liberty Ave. We figured out where all those names come from. And the downtown names, Bove Terrace, for example, is named after George Bove. He was a resident, designed most of the houses in that neighborhood. You know, so downtown's got a lot of good stuff going on, but it just hasn't changed much, right? So there's not much to report on, especially the older history. Slaughterhouse definitely near where like 6th Street is now, where it goes down to the bottom. You had a couple of slaughterhouses down there. You had a couple of greenhouses as well, which were both big industries in the area.
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me? Now I can't see you. Sorry.
No, I can hear you.
You can hear me. Oh, very good. Well, thank you, Michael, for that presentation. I apologize. I came a little late. You kept referring to he. Who is he again? I'm sorry. I heard a lot of it, but I didn't get the person you're referring to as he.
Well, we were talking about Mr. Gargiulo, Commissioner Gargiulo. We interviewed him. We interviewed Charlie Carrera. We interviewed Johnny Shaw, former Chief Galvin, Joe Mangelli. I mean, it depends on where you jumped in.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. So we're in North Bergen 16 years now, and you mentioned Schutlin Park.
Schutlin Park, yeah.
Yeah, that place is very interesting. What can you tell us more about that? Was that before World War I built, or?
Oh, yeah.
How old is that place?
Well, the original building probably is going to date back maybe turn of the century. I would say 1900, but Schutlin Park has been a location since about the 1870s, maybe 1880s. Prior to that, it was actually the property of William Wright. And before that, he was actually a pretty wealthy profiteer. He sold cotton during the Civil War. So he made, or prior to the Civil War, so he made a ton of money. But prior to him living there, there's actually a great story about Schutlin Park, or what will become Schutlin Park. Story is, right, again, romantic story, right, is that a gentleman, English lord by the name of William Cantelo, right, there's a Cantelo Street in Union City now, but William Cantelo kind of got into an argument with his parents about who he was supposed to marry. He didn't like their choice, and he packed his life up and came over here and settled in, you know, what would have been at that moment Bergen Township, right? There's no North Bergen, Jersey City. There's none of that when he gets here, and he builds something. He builds himself a castle, right? Which was kind of par for the course in the area, right? There's several castles in Hudson County during like the 1840s to 1870s, and you know, the castle actually becomes part of Columbia Park. It becomes an amusement. It becomes a dinner hall and whatnot. When the Germans buy it, they make the Schutlin Park Club there. Schutlin Park has an amazing history. They hosted soccer games there before soccer was like a big deal in the United States. They would host international teams and they would play there. Shooting competitions would be there. A lot of people that are still here may remember the you know, the Volksfests or the Oktoberfests that they would host there. They had these huge celebrations there. There's even a little bit of a darker side to Schutlin Park. There were actual German-American Bund meetings there.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting history at Schutlin Park. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of those records are gone, and you know, we've missed out on a lot of preservation there. But that's an interesting place. You can still go down there, see Fritz Reuter's you know, head outside, that big bust of him outside, which is pretty interesting to see.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
No, you're
And
welcome.
on a lighter note, is it true? Is this that there in the 1960s there was one verifiable case of a UFO sighting coming out of North Bergen, and it was supposed to be very, very much documented, more than what you would see today, which would made it really rare to be so well documented. In terms,
Yeah,
I should say reported, maybe not documented, but
sure.
reported. Mhm.
Yeah, we actually talked about that. We did a presentation on that last month. The Obarski, the infamous Obarski event, where George Obarski saw a UFO land in Hudson County Park, saw people get out, and his story is corroborated by two other people unknown to him. A security guard in the Stonehenge apartment buildings and another family in West New York said they saw the same. They all saw the same things. There's actually countless sightings, that people swear by, that they saw something in the park. I personally, I've never seen anything.
Right.
I don't know
Well,
what I
that's
would
why I
do.
said on a lighter note.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's an interesting piece of history. It really is.
yeah. Well, thank you very much for that,
No, you're
Michael.
welcome.
We'll listen in on some other questions.
Sure, great. And then, yeah, Yolanda, to answer your question, right, downtown North Bergen, specifically between about 14th Street to 22nd Street, it was nothing but flower, like hothouses, greenhouses, and nurseries down there. I tell people often, if you've ever tried to grow a garden in North Bergen, especially on the, western side of Kennedy Boulevard, my grandmother always said it's good dirt. We got good dirt. And it's true. There's great dirt in North Bergen for gardening and growing, which makes sense why we had so much of that industry. But, downtown North Bergen, about, like I said, 14th Street to 22nd Street has had a ton of gardening houses, greenhouses. 46th Street, pretty much from Kennedy Boulevard down to through the baseball fields that are there now, had greenhouses on them. The location of the high school had nothing but greenhouses. It actually had an apiary there as well, a honey farm. Bee collectors were there. So yeah, gardening was a huge, huge industry in North Bergen.
Well, I hear that we grow great tomatoes here in our backyard in North Bergen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. If there's no other questions, right? Like I said, we're around, right? We have a great for a couple of things in the pipe coming up. We have a project underway, probably done in several months. We're recreating a lot of the postcards, the historic postcards from town. We're trying to figure the best locations to show how things have stayed the same and how things have changed very much over the last 100 years. So we have a couple of local artists helping us out with that one. That's a lot of fun doing that one. Next month, like I said, we are going to talk about street names in North Bergen, right? Every street's got a little history. We might as well know where that history comes from. So join us next week. We'll be posting on the library's website, on our Facebook page, the North Bergen Historical Society. You can find us there. We also have our blog website that you can find us on there. Actually, I'll post that. I'll give you guys that one right now in the chat. You guys can go here. We have a ton of information about pretty much anything related to North Bergen. And, we update monthly. We try to put a new story up every month, unless we got a big project going on. There are several videos on the library's website, about different things in town. So you could always check them out as well.
Okay.
All right. But again, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for I had to clean up. So, it wasn't, you guys didn't think I was living in like a, craziness, but thanks again for coming. And I hope to see you guys all next time. All right.
Okay. Thank you. And keep it going.
All right, guys. Good night.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye, guys. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Él ahorita lo apaga ya. Ajá, link. Interesante, mira.